Hi, this is Frid from The Joy of Syntax and English in Color. In this video, I want to help you make friends with clause elements. A few days ago, I published a video on word classes, and today I want to explain clause elements to you. Lots of people mix up word classes and clause elements. And there's a little caveat. There is a lot of terminology floating around the concepts of clause elements. And so this particular video will not necessarily help you pass an exam that you will have to take, because your teacher or your school might adhere to a different philosophy. But if you watch this video, you will understand clause elements and you will be able to recognize the units, and then you will be able to handle different names for them. In addition to that, I made a video 2 years ago where I explain the major terminologies that are used for the various clause elements. And I will link that video in the description box below. And if you would like to have the PDF for that video, send me an email, sign up for my newsletter, and I will personally send that to you. Okay, this is going to be a little bit longer again. I really think that if we want to understand language and grammar, we need to take time. And the great thing about YouTube videos is that you can always pause them, get a nice vegan snack, get a nice drink, and then come right back to it. Okay, here we go. I'll share my screen and then we will set to work. There we go. Now, the great news is that there are only 6 clause elements. We can do 6. It's not such a big deal. And I designed a color parsing method to help you in various ways. One advantage is that we can actually move away from terminology and focus on the colors. Another advantage is that you can actually start color parsing your texts, the texts that you have to read and the texts that you are composing or have composed. And you will see that marking your text with colors will help you really digest the text. It will help you make corrections. And it will also show you what kind of a style is used. With this color parsing method, I actually can make different styles visible. And you can then, when you understand the clause elements, understand what kind of reading strategy will be required by your readers, or if you're the reader, by you. I will make a video about that as well. But now we'll start at the beginning. And we'll talk about these 6 clause elements. Then there is another element, which is indicated below. And that element looks like a clause element, but it is actually something else. It is actually a second predicate, which has been placed alongside the existing predicate. And it is often, well, usually it's movable. It can appear in initial position, in medial position, or in final position. And the architecture of the sentence and the paragraph in which the sentence occurs will dictate which position is best. And sometimes there are 2 good options, but for each text and situation, there will be the perfect slot. Anyway, that I will talk much more about predicate appositives in future videos, and I talk about them at great length with my students in VIP and group coaching. So, and one thing I wanted to say before we set out, lots of people start to get a feeling of overwhelm when we discuss grammar, terminology, or anything for that matter. When you start out with something, things will seem overwhelming at first. And I invite you to replace overwhelm by curiosity. Don't go, oh my God, I can't do it, but simply go, I wonder how this applies to my life. I wonder how that can be helpful to me. I wonder how she's going with, where she's going with this and how she's going to explain this. So just try to be curious. Okay, so I'll start with subjects, which I always mark pink. And by the way, I chose the colors because those were the highlighter colors that were available at the office supply store that was around the corner from my office when I worked at the university and designed this method for my students. Okay, so here we go. A subject. Now, the word subject comes from a Latin word, subicere. Now, pardon me, I'm going to pronounce the Latin in a German manner. You know, I have never talked to a Roman, so you know, we can only guess what Latin pronunciation was like. I'm not a Latin scholar, so I'm just going to pronounce the words as I pronounced them in my Latin classes that took place a long time ago. So forgive my Latin, but we can still appreciate the etymology. And I got the etymology both out of Merriam-Webster's Unabridged and from my Latin dictionary that I have. I have a very good scholarly Latin dictionary. Okay, here we go. So Latin, subicere, and that means it's a verb and it means to throw under, to bring under, and to subjugate. And you can see two parts in that word, sub and jacere. I'm sorry, you will recognize jacere as an old friend. In my video where I explained word classes, we learned that an adjective comes from adjacere. The word adjective comes from adjacere, to throw at, and adjectives are word classes that are thrown at nouns, accompany nouns, and modify their meaning, explain something about their characteristic or their situation. And so subjacere means to throw under, and we can say that a subject is the element in a sentence that is subjugated to our attention, is thrown under our attention. So the subject of a sentence is the focal point. It is the element that controls the shape of the verb, and it also controls what kind of a predicate pattern the clause will have. Yeah, and here is some kind of definition that I either copied from a dictionary or then changed. I must admit I don't remember. We can find out. The subject is the clause element that denotes that of which something is affirmed or predicated. It might also be George Kerm's definition. I don't remember. So right now it doesn't matter where this is from, but a subject is this element that controls our attention. So we subjugate it to our attention. Yeah, and I will give you some examples. Now there are various forms of the subject. So remember I told you that it's so important to distinguish between the form of something and the possible functions that this structure can perform. And here are various forms that in these sentences that I'm going to give you perform the function of a subject. Remember that a noun can function as a subject or an object, or can be part of an adverbial. So it's really important to distinguish between the form and meaning potential of a word and the word class it belongs to, as opposed to a function that it performs in a sentence. And I have to remember to make a video about the very important difference between creating a predicate and adding modification. Remind me, should I forget? Okay, the following three sentences are from chapter 1 of The Great Gatsby, one of my favorite novels. And the very first example is indeed the very first sentence. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. My father is the subject of this sentence. It consists of the noun father, and the limiting adjective, also called a possessive adjective, my. My father is a little noun phrase, and it functions as the subject of this wonderful sentence. This next clause is also from chapter 1, but you see it's part of a bigger sentence. But the actual founder of my line was my grandfather's brother. The actual founder of my line serves as the subject of this particular main clause. We see that the nucleus, the main part, is the noun founder. Then we have the adjective as pre-modifier actual. Actual is the pre-modifier. And then the article, the, which is a special kind of limiting adjective according to traditional grammar. And then we have the prepositional phrase of my line as a post-modifier. Pre-modifier means that it's a word modifying an element, and it appears in front of the element, and a post-modifier appears behind it. Very simple. Okay, so we have a noun phrase. It's a bit more complex than my father, but we see it's this noun phrase also serves as the subject in this particular main clause. And this particular main clause is part of a larger sentence that we're not looking at right now. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way. He and we are personal pronouns, and they serve as subjects in these respective main clauses. He didn't say any more as a main clause, but we have always been unusually communicative in a reserved way is also a main clause. And these two main clauses are in a compound sentence, maybe also in a compound complex sentence. I actually don't know right now how the sentence progresses. I only gave you an excerpt because we want to focus on subjects right now. Okay, so in short, subjects can consist of nouns, noun phrases, and pronouns. And yes, there is some controversy around what a phrase is. The traditional definition is that a phrase is a group of two or more words that do not form a clause, that are not part of that don't form a predicate, but that belong together and together serve a purpose in a clause. And then there is the modern definition of a clause where it's more of a slot, and it's like it's a container almost, and it can contain one, two, or many more words that serve a function or fulfill a purpose. So there is this disagreement between traditional and modern grammar. Try not to be confused by that. Just be curious. And it's not important in this video. It's not important for you to understand clause elements. Okay, now adjectives accompany nouns. They can also be other clause elements, but adjectives as attributes cannot be nouns. However, a number of nouns or participles, a number of adjectives and participles that serve adjective function can be nominalized. And here are two examples. Ruler and ruled. So ruled is a past participle that that is here been turned into a noun. So ruler and ruled were alike discontented with the turn of affairs. Rich and poor rejoiced. So rich people and poor people rejoiced. And there we have the rich and the poor, or rich and poor rejoiced. Infinitives are actually considered nouns, and they can fulfill functions that proper nouns or regular nouns fulfill. And infinitives are interesting because, well, in Old English and in modern German, infinitives are actually declined. You can decline them like other nouns. In modern English, you can't, but you can still use them in places where nouns can serve. And infinitives can be basic. There are actually 6 forms of the infinitive. That's also another video. Just one example here, I'll show you in a minute. So there are 5 types of infinitives, 6 types of infinitives. And infinitives can be simple or they can expand it. That means they can govern their own objects or or adverbials. And it's important to see that the object that belongs to an infinitive forms a phrase with the infinitive, and that infinitive phrase then fulfills a function. Now, in the first example, we have a basic example. We have actually 2 basic infinitives. To err or to err, both pronunciations are correct. To err is human, to forgive, divine. Very famous quote. To err is human, to forgive, divine. And here we have ellipses. There could be to forgive is divine, but it's much more snappy and interesting if we leave out the verb. But that's a story for a different video. So we have 2 basic infinitives serving as the subjects of the respective main clauses in which they occur. To have loved and lost is better than never to have loved at all. It's from a famous poem by Tennyson. To have loved is actually the perfect infinitive. And lost, here we also have the I have ellipsis, a case of ellipsis. To have loved and to have lost would be the complete clause, but because the elements to and have are identical, we can leave them out. To have loved and lost is better than never to have loved at all. Now, the third infinitive contains an expansion, so we have to see her standing there. We actually have a little object that's governed by the infinitive, plus an objective predicate, which I will talk about at the end of this video, also being governed by this infinitive. And so this unit, to see her standing there, is an expanded infinitive phrase, and it is functioning as subject here. So to see her standing there was such a relief to him. And since infinitives, the tricky thing is infinitives can be reduced clauses. That's also a topic for a different video. And they can simply be these noun-like units. And here, to see her standing there is a noun-like unit. And strictly speaking, this is a particular kind of noun phrase. So people that discuss phrases usually only talk about 5 types of phrases, and I can make a video about that as well. So here we could say it's an infinitive phrase serving a subject, or we could simply say it's a special kind of noun phrase consisting of the expanded infinitive, to see her standing there. Okay, don't worry about this, just let it sink in, and accept for now that to see her standing there is the subject of this clause. Gerunds are creatures. They're basically hybrids. They are nouns that have been created out of infinitives, out of verbs. So, and the tricky thing is that gerunds look like present participles, and that's why they're often simply called ing forms. A lot of modern school books refer to gerunds as well as to present participles as ing forms. That's very unfortunate, because gerunds are types of nouns, and participles are types of adjectives. And in fact, I'm going to make a video about gerunds and participles and infinitives. One where I simply present in non-finite verb forms, and one where I present each. But for now, just trust me, gerunds and participles are different creatures. They look the same, they happen to have the same ending, but gerunds are nouns and participles are adjectives. And up until the 14th century, gerunds and participles had different grammatical forms. In English, you could distinguish them easily. They looked different. And then over the years, their forms started to look the same, and that's why people started confusing them. But don't confuse them. Okay, reserving judgments. And by the way, if you happen to know German, German doesn't have gerunds. So whenever we encounter a gerund and we need to translate the sentence into German, one good way of translating that is often to use the declined infinitive. But that's also a story for another video. You know, these grammar is huge, and it's important to try to restrict the focus on, you know, to prioritize. So right now, I'm just showing you directions in which we can go and will go later, but for now, let's focus on clause elements. So reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. That's also from the Great Gatsby. Seeing is believing. Okay, those are two examples of gerunds, and we see that a gerund can also govern its own little object or what have you, and in this case, it governs the object judgments. So there's a noun functioning as the object of the gerund, but please note again that the gerund plus the element that it governs together forms a sort of phrase or unit, and that gerund unit serves as the subject of the clause. And again, gerunds are types of nouns, so gerunds are noun phrases. Expanded gerunds and simple gerunds are types of noun phrases, at least can be considered so. And so, in a way, we have a noun phrase serving as subject. Okay, adverbs and prepositions can also be nominalized, turned into nouns, just like adjectives can. And here are two examples. The adverb today can be turned into a noun, and if you translate that into German, you can actually turn that into a noun phrase. You have two translation options here, and that one of them makes it clear that today is a noun here. Today is a lovely day for a pop quiz. So today means this current day, this day right here is a lovely day for a pop quiz. Under is a preposition. So here we are actually looking at under not as a preposition, but as a word that serves as a noun and that noun serves as a subject. Okay, various kinds of phrases can also serve as subjects. For instance, there is this famous quote, "Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise." And early to bed, early to rise, that is like a formulaic clause, a formulaic phrase, and that serves as the subject here. And we could also say, if you go to bed early and if you get up early, then you will become healthy, wealthy, and wise. But the way the person said that is, of course, much nicer. Clauses, both abridged and unabridged. And abridged and unabridged is a different way of saying reduced and unreduced. Can actually be subjects. Not all subclauses can be subjects. Only subclauses that are actually called substantive clauses or noun clauses, with one exception that I don't want you to worry about. So clauses, certain kinds of clauses, reduced or unreduced, can function as subjects. So whoever knows him well respects him. We have a WH clause as subject. That he did this is very shocking. We have a that clause as subject. My friend's deceiving me was a sad disappointment. We have a nominative absolute as subject, and this could, of course, a nominative absolute can always be turned into a complete clause. So we could turn this into that my friend deceived me was a sad disappointment. But this is the absolute phrase here. We have my friends deceiving me. Oh, scratch that. It's actually, oh, bullshit. No, bullshit. I just talked crap. This is not an absolute phrase. This is actually a gerund. But it is a gerund that is an abridged clause. So forget what I just said. So my friends is actually the possessive case, and then so it's not deceiving. Deceiving is a bad, sad disappointment, but my friends deceiving me. So excuse me, I just made a total mistake. Okay, so this is a special kind of gerund phrase that is an abridged clause, and it's my friends deceiving me was a sad disappointment. Okay, so that my friend deceived me would be the unabridged version, and my friends deceiving me is the reduced version where we have turned that into a gerund. Okay, now there are, it is a regular pronoun, but it can also be, so it is a regular pronoun when it refers to a preceding or following noun. But it can be an empty it, a so-called empty it. It can refer to nothing. It can just help to be a dummy subject so that something can be expressed. And somehow with the weather in English and in German, we can't have a functioning subject, because in our Western tradition, we don't believe that someone makes the rain, but we think that rain just happens for a number of reasons. And so we say it rained for 3 days, not St. Peter made it rain or whatever. So it can be a so-called empty subject, and then it just serves, or a dummy subject, and it just serves as the grammatical subject so that we can express that it rained. And the situation, it is also a kind of dummy subject. It is a grammatical subject that does not refer to a person or thing or a circumstance that was explained earlier. It's simply the situation is that it's 3 o'clock. So it's sometimes called a situation it, but both the empty it and the situation it are forms of dummy subjects. So grammatical subjects that we simply use so that the sentence has a subject or the clause has a subject. Then there is the preparatory it, which is different. The preparatory it points to a following real subject. So the preparatory it is a grammatical subject which has been used in order to make the sentence more manageable for the reader or hearer. So the true subject would be, the real semantic subject is that you are here. And we can turn that into the grammatical subject in this sentence, and then we have that clause as subject. But it so happens that somehow native speakers of German and also English prefer to have preparatory subjects and have the bigger information a little bit later. So then you use the grammatical and preparatory subject it, and then you have it is so nice, but then we actually use the semantic subject that you are here as post modifier of nice. When I explain this, it sounds very complicated, but in real life somehow it's not so complicated, and it's very, very common. Okay, now two more kinds of subjects. We have the existential there. So there is, of course, an adverb normally, and I can see a man over there, or he is over there, or he's there. Then there is an adverb serving as adverbial, which will be explained in a minute. But it can be a kind of grammatical subject. There is ice on the lake. We don't say ice on the lake exists or ice on the lake is there. There is not that it is. It's not meant spatially. It simply means there exists ice on the lake. So there can be a grammatical subject. It simply is a fact of life. So there's ice on the lake. There must be somebody at home. Those are examples of existential theirs. And then finally, it, this, that, and which can be so-called sentential subjects. That means that they're not dummy subjects, and they don't refer to nouns, but they refer to predicates, or something that was actually said about something, like the content of the preceding clause. So a friend of mine made me a yummy chocolate cake. That whole thing is a clause with, it's a complete thought. And then I can say that made me happy. So I could actually say that a friend of mine made me a yummy chocolate cake made me happy. And instead of using this complex that clause as a subject, I simply use the deictic pronoun that as pointing towards the preceding sentence and saying that that whole information, that whole event made me happy. So that does not refer to a noun, to a preceding or following noun. It refers to the content of the preceding clause. And we also have these so-called sentential relative clauses, where the relative pronoun which is the subject of that relative clause, points back to the predicate or whatever has been said, or not only the predicate, but to the content of the preceding clause. So Tom kicked Jerry on purpose, which made me mad. Now, my first writing teacher at my college in California forbid us to use sentential it's this is and that's and whiches. He said that only use pronouns when they refer to a noun, and otherwise reformulate. But the fact of the matter is that lots of people use these kinds of sentential pronouns. Okay, that concludes the subject discussion. Remember, the focus right now is simply on going and and simply being curious and noticing things. Don't try to understand. Simply see that this is a way of categorizing language. And just wait. Whether you won't agree in the end, that we can do cool things with that. Okay, all beginnings are difficult though, so yeah, just let this sink in. Now, the second type of clause element is the verb, and here we already run into a problem. We also had verbs as parts of speech, as word classes. And because there is an overlap of terminology, not of concepts, but of terminology, some people use verb phrase or predicate or a process to refer to the finite verb form. Now, a verb is a word that expresses states of being or actions. And the finite verb phrase in a sentence expresses that. So a finite verb always contains at least one verb. So it's either one word, one verb, or a verb phrase. And when it's a verb phrase, it contains actually more than one verb. But a finite verb phrase in a sentence, in an English sentence, always contains only one verb form that is actually finite. The rest of the phrase will be non-finite. I'll explain that in a minute. Anyway, the verb is the clause element that contains a finite verb form of a verb and that expresses an act or occurrence or mood of being and may indicate person, number, tense, aspect, voice, and mood. And let's hurry and look at some examples. So I am looking forward to Christmas. Am looking is the present progressive, and we see we have to be, the first person singular, in the present tense of the verb to be, and then the present participle to form the present progressive form. I am looking forward to Christmas. I am looking. So I am looking is the verb form, and am is the conjugated verb, and looking is the participle. So that's the non-finite verb form. And together they form a phrase, and this phrase functions as the verb in the sense of it being a clause element. I have been working here for 20 years. I have been working is the present perfect progressive form of work, we see that the verb form itself consists of the present perfect of to be in the first person singular, I have been, and then the progressive, the present participle of the main verb work. So I have been working is the present perfect progressive. And there are other ways of seeing that, and I will make a video about this, but for now, please accept have been working is the verb phrase, and it's the finite verb, or it's the finite verbal unit. And finite verb phrases can contain non-finite elements, but all the elements inside of a verb phrase will be most of the time will be verbs. Well, let's not generalize here, but anyway. Tom loves Mary. Here we have a verb phrase consisting of just one verb. So some people wouldn't call it a verb phrase. It's the third person singular in the present tense of the verb love. Tom loves Mary. I wouldn't do that if I were you. We have a conditional clause type 2. Wouldn't do is the conditional one. We have the the modal verb would in the negative and the main verb do, and then we have the subjunctive of to be, which actually looks like the indicative plural, but that's also a story for a different video. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Wouldn't do is a verb phrase or is a finite verb, and were is a finite verb. My dog is in my bed. He became seized with a profound melancholy. He got caught stealing candy. Became seized and got caught are special passive voice constructions, if you want to call them that. Object. The object. Okay, I didn't talk about where the verb comes from. So I explained that actually when I explained word classes. Verb comes from the Latin word verbum, and verbum means word and verb. And that word itself was a translation from a Greek word, rhema, which means word. So, yeah, and in Latin already the word verb was used to denote what it denotes in English today, among other things. So, examples of finite verb phrases, we looked at those, and now we want to look at the object. That comes from Latin obicere, to throw in the way, to hinder, to object. And obicere consists of the prefix ob and the verb jacere. We already know that jacere means to throw, and ob means to, towards, against. So the object is an element that's thrown against. So it's thrown against the element, thrown against the energy, or it throws itself into the path of the energy of the verb. So in an active voice sentence, the subject sends out energy in some shape or form, and in transitive verbs, the energy hits an object. So the object is the clause element that receives the energy of the action of the verb. Examples. There are some verbs that only take one object. Example, Tom loves Mary. There are some verbs that take two objects. Examples, I gave my dog a piece of pizza, and actually my dog is the indirect object, a piece of pizza is the direct object, and there are two possible slots for the indirect object. It can either be between the verb and the direct object, or it can be behind the direct object, but then we need to add a preposition. So I gave a piece of pizza to my dog is also correct. I placed the book on the table. So in this case, we have a verb that has one object, but then there's another element that I will talk about later. So we have here actually 3 types of transitive verb patterns. And those are the 3 types of patterns in which objects occur. So sometimes we have sentences with just one object, sometimes sentences with 2 objects, and sometimes sentences with an object and another element that will be discussed presently. Another very important clause element is the adverbial. It comes from the same root or the same Latin word as adverb. So Latin adverbialis is an adjective, and it is derived from the noun adverbum, which we discussed earlier, in an earlier video. And that word means of or pertaining to an adverb or adverbial. So adverbialis means of or pertaining to an adverb or adverbial. And the noun adverbum means at or near a word or verb. And we saw that adverbs can either be very closely tied to verbs, or they can modify other types of verbs or phrases. And an adverbial is a clause element that expresses all matters related to circumstances of the situation expressed by the verb. So these circumstances are time, matter, place, or purpose, or reason, or condition, or instrument, etc. And also, they can be words or phrases that reflect a speaker's or writer's attitude towards what he is saying in that sentence, or it can be words or phrases that help to organize discourse. And it's very important to distinguish between adverbs and adverbials. Adverbs are word class, is a word class. An adverb is a member of a word class, and it's one word. An adverbial is a functional unit, and it can be realized by adverbs, but it can also be realized by noun phrases and by prepositional phrases, and even by clauses. So stay tuned. And remember, don't be overwhelmed, be curious. Here are examples. There are two main groups of adverbs. In group one, we find so-called obligatory adverbials. Those are adverbials that are needed by a verb to complete its meaning. For instance, he looked around. We can't simply say he looked. We want to either have, we need actually an adverbial of some sort, either an adverb as adverbial or a prepositional phrase as adverbial. He looked at her. He looked at the wall. He looked around. He went home. To go is also one of those verbs that can never appear alone. Sometimes when the context allows it, if it's perfectly clear where you are going, then you don't, the adverbial can be implied, but it will be implied in the text, and it will have occurred before in the text. So strictly speaking, there is always an adverbial with the verb go. He stared at her. I am looking forward to Christmas. Those are examples of obligatory adverbials. If we don't add them in these particular sentences, the sentences are incomplete, syntactically incomplete. Now there are so-called syntactically optional adverbials. That means they are not necessary for the sentence or for the syntax of the sentence to be complete, or the sentence to be a syntactically complete sentence. Semantically, they are, of course, important and non-obligatory, otherwise they wouldn't be in the sentence. And they change the meaning of the sentence, but there is a difference between something being necessary semantically and something being necessary syntactically. So here are examples of syntactically optional adverbials. Finally, after much tossing and turning, the little princess slept soundly in her beautiful bed. So the little princess slept is the most basic types of clause we can have. We have a subject and we have a verb of full predication, and it alone can constitute the predicate. So the little princess slept is the core of the main clause. And all these other adverbs adverbials are syntactically optional, but of course they totally change the sentence, so semantically they are not optional. They would play fun games during the break. We have a prepositional phrase as adverbial, and it is, again, syntactically optional. They would play fun games is a complete clause. The cell phone is thin and light and therefore very convenient to carry around. So interestingly, therefore is an adverb that which is functioning as adverbial here, which denotes that there is a logical connection. It's and it's strictly speaking, not semantically speaking. No, it is also syntactically optional, and the sentence would make sense without it. The cell phone is thin and light and very convenient to carry around. But the speaker or writer of the sentence wants to explain that there is a logical connection between the first and the second clause. Fortunately, the plane was able to land safely. Fortunately is one of those adverbials, adverbs as adverbials, that reflect the speaker's attitude towards what he is saying. So the speaker or writer is relieved that the plane was able to land safely, and so he or she says, fortunately. First, and I used to say to my students, we can have one message, and we can agree on the fact of the message, but we can actually add different adverbials to reflect our attitude. So I can say, fortunately, I get to explain grammar to you right now, and you can say, unfortunately, she gets to explain grammar to us right now. So the final example is an adverb as adverbial that helps to organize discourse. First, let me explain my reasons for calling this meeting. Second, let me do blah, blah, blah. So first, second, third, and a number of other adverbs as adverbials or adverbials, prepositional phrases as adverbials or what have you, can help to organize discourse. And they help both the creator and the reader or listener. But that's also actually a subject for a different video. Okay, a predicate complement. A predicate complement, that we have two Latin words in here, predicate and complement. Predicate comes from predicatum. Predicate is the thing that is said of the subject, and it consists, the word itself consists of two elements, the prefix pré, in front of, before forward tense, and the verb dicere, to say. So predicere means to proclaim and declare, and the predicatum is the thing that is said of the subject. Now, complement comes from the verb complere, to fill up, to complete. So it is the element that completes the predicate or the verb. So the predicate complement is a clause element that follows a link verb and expresses a characteristic or condition of the subject. And link verbs are often called verbs of incomplete predication. When you have a verb like sleep, she slept, then slept is enough for the sentence to be complete, semantically and syntactically. If I say she slept, that's a complete thought, it's a complete sentence. When I say Tom loves Mary, when I just say Tom loves, that's not a complete sentence. However, I can already see the direction that the thought is taking, and I simply want to know where the loving energy is bestowed. But when I say I am, it in rare cases can mean I exist, but usually it means the link verb is like an equal sign in an equation, like A equals B. So I don't know what's going to come. Like, I'm happy, I'm an English teacher, I'm a nerd, I'm here, I'm in front of the camera. We don't know what will follow. So we simply need an element. And in fact, the predicate complement is much more important than the link verb. And there are some varieties of English where under certain circumstances, you can leave out the link verb and you simply need the subject and the predicate complement. We'll have examples here. Saba was so excited about going to school again. So Saba is the subject, was is the verb, and so excited about going to school again is the adjective phrase functioning as predicate complement. Now, caveat, this is a hotly debated clause element. There are so many different names for it, and then there is also a vital disagreement. look at these. We have here an adjective phrase, here a pronoun, here a phrase, here a noun phrase, and here an infinitive phrase, all functioning as predicate complement. And these all say something about the nature of the subjects. Now, in this sentence, my dog is in my bed. In my bed is a prepositional phrase denoting location. And there are some grammarians who say that this in my bed is a prep phrase functioning as subject-related obligatory adverbial of place. Now, I don't agree with that because I think that this type of categorization violates the function versus form dichotomy, but that's also a longer story. Right now, I just want you to know that I go with George Kerm, who is a very well-known and very, very competent traditional grammarian. Well, he has transitioned, but his book is still around. His books are still around. So I'm going with traditional grammar here. Traditional grammar as explained by George Kerm, who was extremely knowledgeable. And I am sticking to the distinction between form and function. And we have this element that follows the link verb, and then we can see that a variety of word forms can fulfill the function of this clause element. Okay, finally, we have objective predicates. Now, I already explained these words. Basically, objective comes from the same word as object, as the word object. So it means something thrown in the path of something. And predicatum was already explained. It's the thing that you say about something. So the objective predicate is the element that follows the object and expresses something about the object. And the relationship between object and objective predicate is basically the same as the relationship between subject and predicate complement. So just as the predicate complement says something about the subject, so the objective predicate says something about the object, and I'll explain that more. So she called him a beast. So, and very important, the objective predicate can express something about the subject, either the nature of the object, either the nature of the object as such, or a condition of the object as a result of the action of the verb. So she called him a beast. Now, this is actually something she considers him a beast. So she thinks that he is a beast. So she thinks that he is a beast. So you see this he beast in this relationship, him beast is in the same relationship as he is a beast. So she called him a beast, or she considers him a beast. They named the baby Thomas. Now, the baby is named Thomas. So we see that the action of the verb actually turns the baby into Thomas. Betty saw the burglar climbing through the neighbor's window. Here, the action of the verb is not having an effect on the objective predicate. We simply see, it's basically Betty saw that the burglar was climbing through the window. We see that the object and the objective predicate are forming a unit. And so climbing through the window is the action engaged in by the burglar while he was observed by Betty. I consider myself lucky. I painted the living room light blue. So here, or he painted the living room light blue. We see here the light blue, the living room being blue is a result of the action of the verb. I always drink my coffee black. That's just a statement. My coffee is not made black by the action of the verb, but this is an information that when I drink coffee, the coffee is always black, basically. And just as there is this disagreement around the objective predicate with some modern views, we have the same controversy that exists around the predicate complement also exists around the objective predicate. So some people would say that on the table here is not an objective predicate, but that it's an object-related, obligatory or mandatory adverbial. But I don't see it that way. I go with Kerm again, because we see that on the table is the place of the object as a result of the verb. So I clearly see this. Tom did the placing and now the book is on the table. So the book on the table, there's the same relationship between book and table as there is between these other objects and the following element. Yeah, this is the most complex clause pattern that exists in English. The objective predicate is one of the two most complicated concepts or elements for students. So try not to worry. You will get used to this and simply find it interesting. So again, remember, transform your overwhelm into curiosity. Finally, we have an element that often looks like a clause element, but it is not a clause element. A predicate appositive. I explained the word predicate multiple times. Now, so we know it's making a statement about, saying something about, uttering something about. And we now need to explain apposition, which is ultimately derived from the verb apponere, which means to place near or set before or put before or something, or to assign, to serve up, whatever. So the predicate appositive is a non-finite or verbless predicate that is placed alongside the existing predicate and looks like a clause element. Yeah, and some writers and grammarians call it a free modifier. Predicate appositives are wonderful creatures. They exist in both English and German. And you can do so much with this. You can have so much fun with it. They're fantastic, and I will make many more videos about them, and I discuss them at great length in my work with my work with my students. And by the way, I also discuss them in my grammar book. Okay, here are examples. Late at night, he returned home drunk but happy. I could turn this into two sentences. I could say, late at night, he returned home. He was drunk and happy, or he was drunk but happy. And instead, I can take what in that sentence would be the predicate complement and add it as a predicate appositive into this other clause. Now, in many sentences, the predicate appositive is or could be seen as a predicate complement in another sentence, but it isn't always a predicate complement, or not strictly speaking. That's a complicated issue. Like we wouldn't say in the next example, they entered the house as friends. We wouldn't say they were as friends. We would say they were friends. So there is this prepositional phrase, as friends, as the two prepositional phrases, as friends, as enemies, and they serve as predicate appositives. So they entered the house as friends. When they entered the house, they were friends. But when they left the house, they were enemies. And instead of saying it like this, you can actually have a shorter, more compact version and say they entered the house as friends, but they left it as enemies. She was like a bird, full of joy and music. We could say she was like a bird and she was full of joy and music. So we take the second predicate and just take the expressive element and add it into the first sentence, or to the first sentence. Now, in the final example, I actually have a reduced adverbial clause functioning as predicate appositive. I'll read the sentence and then I'll unpack it for you. The following evening, having refused Elliot's telephone offer to fetch me, I arrived quite safely at Mrs. Bradley's house. Some people might recognize this sentence from the novel The Razor's Edge by Mom. I forgot his first name. I'm so bad with names. Somerset Maugham. There we go. Okay, the following evening, I arrived quite safely at Mrs. Bradley's house. That's the main clause. And I could add the information after I had refused Elliot's telephone offer to fetch me. And I could actually add this adverbial subclause at the end, or in the very beginning, or even in the spot where it is now. I could say the following evening, comma, after I had refused Elliot's telephone offer to fetch me, comma, I arrived quite safely at Mrs. Bradley's house. But instead, I can actually turn this into a participle construction and then add it as a predicate appositive. And I think it's much more elegant this way. So predicate appositives offer wonderful options. And you know what I find so interesting? When these they are reduced clauses, we could actually turn, we could also turn the participle construction into a main clause. We could say, I had refused Elliot's telephone offer to fetch me. We could use that as a main clause afterwards. We could say the following evening, I arrived quite safely at Mrs. Bradley's house. I had refused Elliot's telephone offer to fetch me. We could actually add it as a main clause, or we could add this information as an adverbial clause. So in a way, by choosing this predicate appositive option, I can actually hold both options simultaneously. Somehow both options are present in this reduced structure, and therefore this makes this sentence more potent, I think. See and whether you agree with me and follow what I'm saying. Okay, here are the clause elements again at a single glance. We have subjects, verbs, objects, adverbials, predicate complements, and objective predicates. You can pause the video and take a screenshot. And in addition to that, we have this thing that looks like a clause element, but is actually a second predicate, either verbless or non-finite, which has been placed into an existing sentence, and it can be placed, actually in some cases, it's added, but it can also sometimes be inserted, as we saw previously, or it can be added in initial position. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this introduction to clause elements. You can watch this more times than one. You can ask me questions in the comment section, or you can write me an email. Get on my mailing list, because I am going to offer a number of webinars. So you can get informed about when the webinars will take place. But in the meantime, you can always ask me questions, and I will be happy to make a video where I answer these questions. What you can also do is you could actually buy my book. There is a picture of it, and here it is. I actually put the sticker on there. My friend and designer, Jen Barbado, made this lovely logo for me, and I stuck it on here. Yeah, you could buy the book, or you could actually book some VIP coaching or group coaching with me. I love teaching grammar. Makes me totally happy, and I actually think that it is very, very important. Studying grammar enables you to understand how language works, and language is a tool that helps us perceive the world, and it helps us tell stories about the world, and the stories we tell ourselves about the world or are told about the world, they will control how we think and feel and how we act. And actually, by changing our stories, we can change our behavior and our outlook on life. And stories are either imprisoning or they are liberating. And when we study grammar, we can see what language does for us or against us or to us or with us. And we can learn to control our experience. I think that studying grammar is not only a civic, it's not only a right, but a civic duty, really. And so as soon as one studies grammar, one starts seeing the world with different eyes. Trust me, it's a very wonderful experience. One needs a bit of patience to get used to, a different way of handling life. But anyway, patience is a virtue, I think. But that's neither here nor there for now. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and share the video. and I will see you in the next one. Have a good day. Take good care. Bye-bye.